All right, hello and welcome to Penn Admissions Counselor Recommendation Workshop. My name is Jessica Ward. I use the pronouns she and her, and I'm an admissions officer at Penn. And I will let my colleague introduce herself as well.
Hi there, my name is Maria Gaston. I'm also admissions officer here at Penn, and we're really excited to talk with you about this topic today. I use the pronouns she and hers as well.
Great. And before we get started, we start all of our presentations at Penn with a land acknowledgement. Penn occupies the traditional homelands of the Lenni Lenape. Penn acknowledges this fact and expresses gratitude towards Indigenous people, both past and present, for the opportunity to live on and through Lenapehoking, land of the Lenape. Thank you. And the goals of this workshop today. We are going to talk about what colleges and universities are looking for in that counselor letter. We'll talk about how a successful recommendation letter can be structured, and we'll give some final tips for using the organized narrative format if you are interested in looking into that. But overall, we want to talk about what we're really looking for when we read those letters. Both Maria and I have read thousands and thousands and thousands of applications at Penn over many years. And number one, the letters are really important. We pay very close attention to them and we talk about them throughout the entire process. And number two, what we're going to talk about today is relevant to Penn admissions, of course, but it should be pretty broad advice that should be relevant to any college or university that uses letters in their review process.
So as you're thinking about writing your letter of recommendation for students, we have some topics that we want you to really consider. These are different things that we admissions officers really value and try to understand about your student, and you can help us do that in a couple of different ways. As you think about who this student is amongst their peers, you can ask yourself a couple of different questions to help us understand that. How do they interact with their current peers? Or what are the ways that you're seeing or hearing from other people about their interaction in your school community? But also, over all the time that you've been a counselor, how do they compare with other students that you have worked with? How do they stand out, or how do they differentiate, or how do they really resonate with those students that you've worked with? Other things about this student's background that can be helpful to us is giving information about different obstacles or setbacks that they may have faced, and really helping us to understand a little bit more than they may be able to say on their own. And then thinking about who they are in your school community, maybe in their home or family community, and really seeing the ways that they've made a change or a difference when you're talking about them as an engaged community member. We're also thinking of these students as scholars. And so understanding the trajectory of their curriculum or how they've moved through the available options or unavailable options at your school can really help us contextualize that transcript that we're receiving from the student and learn about the different ways that they may engage with your school as a scholar, as we try to imagine them as a scholar at our institution. When it comes to providing the context in your letter, one of the analogies we like to use that differentiates your counselor letter from the letters of recommendation from teachers is this idea of a floodlight versus a spotlight. Think of a floodlight as like at a sports field. And so the floodlight really is going to make sure you can see the entire picture. And so that wherever you are in the stadium, that you can get a sense of what's going on the field and in other parts of the stadium. That's going to be more like the counselor letter. So you're giving this bigger picture overview. The spotlight is really going to focus in on one particular area, and so that might be a particular class or classroom. These teacher recommendations really help us to spotlight a student within the classroom, and you're accomplishing something pretty different. As you are providing this floodlight of information, we think it's really important to categorize the context you share in 3 different areas. So you're getting a chance to introduce yourself as a counselor, a professional. How long have you been at this school? Or how long have you been a counselor? How many students do you work with? Those sorts of questions and information can help us to understand if you're brand new to a school or if you've been there for a really long time. As you think of introducing your school, remember that we do get to see your school profile. And so the information on your school profile can really complement the information that you provide in your letter. So there might be context about specialized programs. There might be context about classes that are being offered this year, and maybe that's different from last year, vice versa. Those important pieces of information to highlight about your particular school can also provide a good foundation for your information about the student. When it comes to introducing the student themselves, we want to know, how long have you known them? Are they brand new to your caseload? Have you been working with them since 9th grade, the second half of 11th grade? And then you want to give us a general overall statement about what you want to highlight about this student. This thesis statement can be a great way to tell us what we're about to read in the rest of your letter, so we can find those details and really tie it into this overall thesis statement. The cool thing about this thesis statement is we can take this into the committee room and pretty much use your words to describe this student, so we can prepare our fellow colleagues about what we will explore about this student's background, their characteristics, and them as a scholar.
All right, and on the screen here, we're going to go through some of the questions that you can ask yourself when you're actually writing that letter and providing this evidence and context. So I'm not going to read through all of these, and I also want to note that every single letter will not answer all of these questions, but these can be a great jumping off point as you do your own reflection and start writing those letters. So we're interested in how the students impacted your community. Are they a big leader? Are they a role model? Maybe they're more quiet and in the crowd, but when they do contribute, it's really meaningful. Think about how your school might be different when the student graduates, or how you might see a student interacting on a college campus. We then want to talk about intellectual curiosity. At highly selective schools, we're seeing so many students with excellent grades and really powerful academics, but we're also looking for those intellectually curious students kind of behind all those grades. So have they taken a more challenging curriculum than others? What's their rigor like compared to the overall vibe of your school? Or have they shown a lot of really significant academic growth throughout high school? How do you imagine them in a college or university academic setting? And if they're struggling and need help, how do they go ahead and ask for that support, either from their teachers or maybe from your office? We are interested in how the student interacts with peers, knowing that they're going to be part of our college community. If you have this information, please feel free to share how they might work with others, how they may help other students. Are they respectful of other students? And also, how do they maybe compare to peers at their school or to people or students you've worked with throughout your entire career? Are they more motivated or engaged than the average student? Are they one who you're going to remember for a long time? And giving us that evidence of what really makes them stand out or makes them memorable to you is always really helpful. And as we're going through these questions, you can also feel free to take a picture or a screenshot, or maybe you want to pause the video and write down these questions if you think it'll be helpful in your own writing process. Finally, we're interested in, if the student has faced obstacles or setbacks, how have they reacted to that? So if you're writing a letter for a student who's faced some challenges in school, how did they respond? What flashes of potential or improvement have you noticed for a student who has really struggled? And then finally, this won't apply to every student you write a letter for, but we all know that there are students who are dealing with a lot outside of the classroom, maybe things going on at home, maybe a health struggle. We know that you've probably seen it all, and we see that come through in the applications too. So if they have dealt with a challenging situation, is there anything that we should be aware of? That context and information you can give us is always really helpful. And we're also interested in how the student has been able to work through those challenges, and knowing that if they have gone through something tough, that you feel confident that they are doing okay and that you're supportive of them taking this next step to college.
So as we get a little bit more specific with our advice, we find that there are some elements of letters that we've seen over time that are more effective and some elements that are less effective. So as we really think about setting you up for success and helping you to really improve your already great writing style and approach, think about these different areas of how you're going to corroborate, how you're going to provide context, and how you're really going to structure your letter. Some of the more effective ways that you can provide context is thinking about circumstances that led up to an outcome we see in a different part of the application. Maybe there are particular grades, maybe there's a certain course progression, maybe something else has changed about the student's activities or involvement at your school. And so being able to give more information about the circumstances, policies, things in that student's life that led up to that can be super illuminating for us. Another thing that can be really helpful to understand is your caseload. So at public schools across America, we know that the average student to counselor ratio is particularly high. And so knowing how much you get to interact or engage with the student can really help set that foundation of what we're about to read and help us to better understand your letter and your engagement with that student. With the other parts of the application that a student provides, whether it's their activities list, their resume, their transcript, their own words, we know students aren't always the best advocates for themselves. So you being able to corroborate some of the pieces of their application can help it shine even more. And so showing a student who's really made a difference and an impact in your community might help us understand leadership and impact of a person who doesn't have a ton of super official or elected positions or roles in any of their activities. Other ways that you're able to see them demonstrate their strength, their personal qualities, can help us as we're trying to understand who the student can be as a scholar, who the student can be as a future community member at our institution. As you're structuring your letter and providing an overview of the student, highlight reel, I like to call it as well, you really want to help us to focus in on their engagement with others in their school community, the broader community, or their household, and really be able to also see some of those academic qualities and personal qualities come together. You don't have to worry about focusing in on a particular class or course or activity that they've participated in. You get to kind of string those pieces together at a larger level for us. Some of the less effective elements that kind of really can turn into more effective elements if you go beyond them are thinking about how you start your letter. Do you have a template that you use? That's totally fine if you do, but that template, you're going to want to pay attention to some things that could potentially hold your letter back. So you might have some praise for a student. Maybe it's some of these adjectives that are on the right side of the screen. They're a quiet leader, they're a hard worker, they're one of the best. Those different phrases of praise are really going to be best suited when you add details to them. How has that person led even though they may not be as loud at the front of the room? How has that person shown themselves to be one of the best and distinguished themselves from other students who are great in your school or that you've worked with? When you are personalizing these letters for students, really pay attention to how they spell their name. Are you using their preferred name? Are you using the pronouns that they use for themselves? And are you making sure to change that out if you are reusing templates between students? Copy and paste is not the friend of our students in our essays sometimes, and sometimes it's not our friends in rec letters either. So that's just something to really pay attention to. As you start with these templates that get the juices going, help you to start to brainstorm about this student, we really hope that you're able to add some specifics in. So it goes from being more of a template or a form letter to being something that's really tailored for that student. Doesn't mean you have to tailor 5 pages about this student. It just means you can provide some very specific info. As we mentioned earlier, other parts of the application are really meant to really come together and build off of each other as opposed to mirroring each other. So your recommendation letter is something that is going to add context or maybe further information than the student's resume or activities list would, maybe more than what their transcript says. We already see grades and what classes they've taken, but you get to tell us about how typically this class is only offered for 5 students each year. Or in 11th grade, this class wasn't available, so the student is now taking it in 12th. So you really get to take these parts that can be less effective and make them even more effective if you go to that next step.
Thanks, Maria. And speaking about structure and format, we wanted to take a minute to highlight a newer type of recommendation letter that's really gained more popularity over the last few years. So this is an example of the organized narrative letter. And this example you see on your screen is actually available as downloadable PDF from NACAC's website at the link below. So you don't need to feel like you need to squint your eyes and read that right now. But if you're interested in this format of letter, there's a lot of great resources that NACAC provides. Our colleague John McLaughlin, who is our Director of Admissions, participated in this NACAC presentation back in 2017, where he worked with colleagues both from the admissions side and the counselor side to talk a little bit about this newer format. And the organized narrative is really going to be something that's very customizable. So this is just one example. But essentially what it means is that instead of a traditional narrative letter, you might be writing a letter that has the same exact content, but it's using bullets, it's using heading, maybe you're going to bold some areas or include some italics that really kind of direct the reader's eye to what might be most important in the letter. It's totally customizable. So in this example from Roland Hall, you can see this counselor split it up into distinctive qualities, academic and intellectual growth and trends, areas of impact, and then a little section for student self-reflection. But we see a lot of letters that look like this and might have totally different topics or headings or different formats. The whole point of the organized narrative is to guide readers to the most important point. And as an admissions reader, we do appreciate these letters because they really make it clear when we're reading so many applications of what is most important. Like we said, this is from a NACAC presentation, and if you go to this link on the screen, you can go ahead and access more information and resources about this type of letter. If you're interested in using this letter, you can definitely check those out. Maybe you're already writing this kind of letter, and that's great. Or maybe you're really happy with the traditional letter style, and that's perfectly fine too. We don't necessarily prefer one over the other, and it's not going to have an impact on your chances of your student being admitted. But if you want to try something new, we wanted to point you the right direction to check this out. And from this presentation, there was a survey done of different counselors and teachers who tried out this narrative format, and we wanted to talk a little bit about the benefits for both sides of the desk. The number one piece of feedback was that this is a big time saver. It really lets you kind of free from writing that traditional letter of prose and trying to figure out the style and how to be creative, and you instead get to just focus on the content. It's also really easy to go back to writing without losing flow. So we know that you are all extremely busy. I'm sure that you have plenty of student meetings and other things going on in your school, in addition to having to write a huge amount of letters. So we found that some counselors and teachers said that it was really easy for them to maybe in the morning, they had about a half hour free. They could write the whole academic summary, and then they could leave that and go back to it later and pop right in and just summarize the activity section, for example. So it's a little bit easier to go in and out of as opposed to a traditional letter. Again, it really makes the important points stand out to us, and it's really easy to read, to analyze, and to revisit. When we read applications, we're typically trying to pull out those important points from all of the letters we read, and we might be making notes, and we're also really referencing those in committee, as Maria was saying earlier. So if I'm in committee, maybe I'm talking about a student, and I want to point out that the student has maxed out the math curriculum at their school, and they actually went above and beyond and started taking linear algebra at a local college. And maybe in your letter, you note that no student has done that at your high school in 10 years. Instead of just having to write that down, I can say, and if you open up that counselor letter, you can see in that second bullet point, the counselor really goes to bat for the student about how intense they are in math. That's just one example, but it does make it helpful for us to really kind of pick out those important points that you want us to know.
We hope that this so far has really laid the foundation for how you are setting yourself up for success to write your letters. But we know that you have frequently these three more questions that are typically lingering on your mind. So the first one really being like, okay, real deal, what is the length of the preferred recommendation? Is there too short? Is there too long? So the thing is that we really want you to be able to share the information that you need. And so there's not a minimum expectation of how long that you write your letter. But at the same time, we know you have a lot to do. And so you don't get to write a book about every single student. So really thinking about how you can best fill about a page, maybe it spills over onto a second page a little bit, but around a page is sufficient for us so that you can save time on your letters, and also thinking about the time it takes us to read your letters and to share that information in our process.
Another question that we get is, how can I write an effective letter if I don't know a student well? And we've talked a little bit about caseloads, but we know that the majority of counselors aren't going to know their students all that well, but that does not mean that they can't write an effective letter. At the end of the day, an effective letter gives us some context about the school. It gives us some information about the student, particularly who they are in a community and what rigor of courses they've taken and how they've challenged themselves academically. And if that is all that you've got to go on, that can still be really helpful. Remember that your letter is only one piece of the application, and the rest of it is from the teachers who are going to probably know the student a bit better if they've been teaching them for an entire year, and also the student's own voice. We also know that there are plenty of resources out there if you want to look into a brag sheet or a personal form students can fill out and send to you. Maybe you want to have students meet with you and do a little bit of self-reflection on what they're looking for from a college. And you know, those examples can always be helpful. But at the end of the day, a quick short letter that maybe acknowledges you just met this student, or maybe you're new in your role, or you have 500 students on your caseload, and gives us that basic info can be perfectly effective.
With this crazy year that we've all been having, we've all been impacted, but that's looked a little different for each of us. And so you might be wondering, will your letter matter even more this year? And we really want to reassure you, your letter matters every year. The information that we get from your letter is not information we typically can get from any other part of the student's application. So yes, you may have fewer quantitative pieces to go off of this year to provide for a student, especially thinking about test optional schools, thinking about the fact that your school may not be providing grades for your students at the moment. And so we will look to more of the qualitative pieces of the application to help that student come together. And you always have been helpful in helping us to really see the student come to life off of the page.
All right, that about wraps up our presentation. We want to thank you for tuning in. There are plenty of further resources for both counselors and teachers listed below. We have a counselor page on our website at that link. We also have our Penn admissions blog, which has great advice for students and families as well as counselors. And there's also a page on our website specifically focusing on what we're looking for when it comes to teacher recommendations. We also encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about Penn or you want to tell your students or families more about Penn, we have great virtual visit options on our website, including info sessions, school-specific sessions, and virtual tours. We also have a great YouTube page at Penn Admissions, which has both counselor and student resources and workshops, as well as a great video series that goes into a lot of depth on our application process in general. And then you can always follow us on social media at Previewing Penn. We want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to listen to these tips. And we also want to thank you so much for all that you do on behalf of your students. We really appreciate it. Again, these letters are very important and we know they take a lot of time and effort to write. Please know that we are really treasuring that commitment on our side of the desk, and we all have that common goal of getting these excellent students to college. Thank you so much, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.